Over the last couple of weeks I've been making a load of assets for an upcoming project, and I've recorded the whole thing and I thought I would share that process. If you're interested, all of the assets that I've made as well as this scene with the animation is going to be available in the $1 tier on my Patreon. This is a really quick test scene that I just set up this morning to put everything into one place and give a good demo of it. I used pretty much every technique under the sun to make all of this stuff, and my main goal was just to work as efficiently as I could. To make an environment from scratch is a huge amount of work, and to do it traditionally by the book will take a really long time. So I tried to work as efficiently as I could, and as you'll see in this video I put lots more effort into the things in the foreground, and as it gets more into the midground and the background they have less and less detail. For the objects that needed more detail and would be closer to the camera, I decided to model them the traditional way, and then once the models were finished I projected some photo textures onto them to add some of the micro detail that you don't get in the model. At this point there's loads of Blender tutorials floating around on YouTube about using photo textures. People like Ian Hubert have made it really popular, and there's a good reason for that. It works really well. For a lot of it I just modelled the basic shapes and then the materials add lots of detail. I found a really good way to make fences really quickly. You can go into edit mode, select all of the vertices around the edge that you want to turn into a fence, then I extruded it upwards to make the actual faces for the fence, and then you can use a load of loop cuts to make all of the different sections of the fence. Once that's done you can add a wireframe modifier and turn down the thickness a bit until you get the size you're looking for. I was also using decimate and set it to planar just to get rid of all the extra geometry so that the fences were as low poly as possible. Some of these photo textures I found were really awesome, but they had some things in the textures that I didn't want, for example the red tape in this. So instead of just not using the texture, I decided to take some of them into Nuke and do some clone painting just to remove the stuff that I didn't want from the texture so that I could use the whole thing how I was originally intending. It's really simple, takes like 2 or 3 minutes, and then you can use the whole texture instead of trying to avoid a certain area. I made this really cool metal structure. I don't even really know what it is or what it's meant to be. I find it quite challenging to come up with cool designs for things off the top of my head just from scratch, so I often use a lot of reference images and just base things on that instead. Then at the very least, even if it's not exactly the same, I'm still pulling from some real world references, which usually turns out much better and looks more natural. I based this off of a photo texture that I found on textures.com that I'll show here. For the chimneys and tubes and stuff right in the background, I found a few things on textures.com that were really perfect for this. These are just 2D photos, and then what I did is I took them into Nuke and keyed the sky with a Luma key so that I could cut them out. I had to do a little bit of roto as well just to draw some masks for where the key wasn't quite working. And then I exported these as PNG so I can put them on planes in Blender in the background with the transparency. This is a really cheaty technique, but it works really well because it's so far away that you don't really notice any difference in parallax. And so instead of having to go in and model all of this interesting detail, I can just use a photo texture, so it saves loads of time. I made some really generic piles of trash just by projecting some rubbish textures onto a plane. I made it a bit bumpy with a displacement modifier, then I modelled a few bits of geometry like some rebar and some concrete just to stick out. To make the chunks of concrete I used a cell fracture modifier on a cube and then just selected some bits that looked cool, and then I did a cube projection unwrap and just put some concrete textures on them. Once all the assets were finished, I threw them into a scene this morning, as you see here, and I just made a little test just to see how they would all work with an HDRI and with some animation. I used a seamless sand texture on the floor and then made some really ropey looking cliffs, and again projected some photo textures of some cliffs onto them. I know in my head that all this stuff is going to be in the background and slightly out of focus and very motion blurred, so it doesn't really need loads of effort. And then I start dragging in all of the assets and placing them in places that I think look good. This part's really fun. It's like a puzzle and you can start combining loads of different assets you've made to make loads of combinations of different things. So for example, I used the same building a few times, but I put things like tanks and air conditioners and cables and stuff on top to make it look a bit different. You can rotate it in the scene so you see it from a different angle. All these things are really good because it means you don't have to model loads and loads of different things. You can just be smart about the ones you use. I really like the cables in this. I don't know why, but it just makes it feel a bit more dynamic. A lot of the assets felt a bit separate and isolated before, but linking a load of the stuff with cables really made it come together and felt a bit more cohesive. When I do this for real for the final video, I'm going to do a few things like sculpting the floor a bit better around the edges of the building so there's some build up of sand, stuff like that. There's lots of little details in the gaps in between all of the big assets that will really help to tie it all together. And then once the environment was set up, I brought in the rig of the solar surfer and the photo scan of me that I've made in the last few videos on my channel. I made the hands and feet into IK systems so that they would move with the solar surfer once they were parented to it. And then on the root bone of me, I added one keyframe for location and then added a noise modifier so that my core would move around procedurally. And I also put a noise modifier on the rotation of the sail on the solar surfer. So that way the sail and my core are procedurally moving on their own without me having to do any animation, but the hands and feet are sticking to the sail and the board. So basically from a wide shot it looks like my body is reacting to the way that the wind is moving and everything, and actually I don't have to do any animation and it's all being driven by the noise modifiers, which looks really cool. I dropped in an HDRI, found a lighting angle that I liked, and then hit render, and this is the final result. I'm really happy with how these tests turned out, and I'm super excited to get on with the final video, and I'm hoping to be able to crack on with it and get it out fairly soon. Thanks very much for watching, consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah, I had you where I wanted you, had you by my side. It was all I ever needed, but couldn't realize. I don't know how it feels to be someone you love, and it gets me down. I let it slip somehow.